This PowerPoint presentation focuses on the evaluation of arts partnerships. It really could apply to any arts organization, whether it be an arts partner or not. It kind of shows what approaches one might use to non-school, the evaluation of programs that are in non-school settings. The next unit focuses more on school settings. Arts partnerships really began in the 1960s. They're typically school and community partnerships, community-based arts organizations being groups like orchestras and opera companies and museums who provide programs for schools. A lot of the funding has been supported by the National Endowment for the Arts, often through state arts organization. And many community-based arts organizations have educational programs. Sometimes arts partnerships work independently from art specialists in schools, and that's obviously not a desirable circumstance. The best, most effective partnerships are well integrated into school arts programs. For periods of times, particularly when there are fewer arts specialists in schools, particularly, for instance, in the New York City schools, for the 20-year period between 1976 and 1996, where there were very few arts specialists in schools, arts partnerships provided, in some cases, the only arts experiences that elementary school students had in New York City. Ideally, arts partnership programs work collaboratively with school-based arts specialists and are coordinated with the arts curriculum, and sometimes they're coordinated also with the non-arts curriculum. The goals of arts partnerships vary. Sometimes they're very self-serving, which means they're, ultimately their goal is to develop new audiences. But for instance, Lincoln Center Institutes focuses on aesthetic education. You could say broadly most of them work towards developing an understanding and appreciation for the arts. Sometimes arts partnerships focus on developing art skills. For instance, the Hartford Symphony has a program where they not only go into schools to help to encourage students to play instruments, but also then more advanced students get to play sitting next to a Hartford Symphony member, so that they're further encouraged and actually, learn some skill development, have some skill development during that experience. Sometimes arts partnerships focus on acquiring skills and understandings in other academic areas. Particularly in the 1990s, that has been the emphasis of many arts partnerships. Sometimes because they can seek additional funding. So funding not only to support the arts, but funding to support learning in other areas. Programs like No Child Left Behind, which is part of the education reform passed by former President Bush in 2001, have stimulated arts programs to work in support of other school areas, because after all, the other school areas are the areas that are being tested. So when we're testing for language arts, math, science, and social studies, arts partnerships are saying, hey, look, we'll design a program that supports learning in language arts, and therefore you should fund our program, because maybe our program will be more successful than traditional programs that try to help kids learn in communication skills. So, as a consequence of NCLB, there's more time spent on tested subjects, less time for arts programs. Arts partnerships are smart. They've redefined their programs and sometimes emphasize instrumental outcomes, instrumental in this case being outcomes for the arts in service of other areas rather than in service of the arts themselves, using the arts instrumentally to help other subject areas. This is kind of all based on the notion that arts make you smarter. Of course, we know clearly music makes you smarter, and seems to be some evidence to suggest that. at least a relationship between arts learning. Even to the extent that in 1995, a commission appointed by President Clinton stated in a printed document, teaching the arts has a significant effect on the overall success in schools. And so generally you might argue that people believe this. This general relationship has what we might consider to do with transfer effects. So Thorndike, a educational psychologist who was at Teachers College during his career, says about transfer that transfer is likely to occur with similar subject areas that are closely parallel. There's also some notion that there are neurobiological explanations for the effect of the arts make you smarter. For instance, the Mozart effect. Sometimes there's a notion that you gain general dispositions. That is, for instance, if you're in a music setting and you're an instrumental or vocalist and you are good at practicing, you're disciplined about your practicing, well, maybe that generalizes to other school work. So if you're very disciplined about learning an instrument, maybe that will help you be disciplined about learning social studies. Burton, Horwitz, and Abeles in 1999 conducted a study entitled Learning in and Through the Arts, in which we identified 8 general indicators of transfer. These are broader than the specific ones just reviewed. So we believe the indicators of learning include the notion of expression of ideas and feelings, focused perception, making connections, layered relationships, the construction and organization of meaning, multiple and alternative vantage points, imagining new possibility, and sensory learning. Obviously, not every art emphasizes each of these, but we think if you take the arts as a whole, and our study looked at music, art, dance, and theater, that a consequence of arts learning may be to heighten these indicators or these areas. So the question now, if we're focusing on how do we evaluate arts partnerships, one of the questions might be, how do we establish, what kind of evidence do we use? One of the challenges is differentiating between correlational studies and causality. Arts, for instance, there's some evidence that's been quoted by arts organizations that arts participation increases SAT scores. In fact, there is a correlation. But because there's a correlation, because the two are related, doesn't necessarily mean that arts study causes an increase in SAT scores. It may be that bright students choose to participate in the arts, and those bright students also have high scores on the SAT. One of the challenges in investigating the relationships like this is that causal research designs are seldom possible. Causal research designs examine cause and effect. That is, if you participate in the arts, then it causes you to do better in something else. They're hard to design because usually programs are already in place, so it's hard to have a, quote, experimental and control group. And typically, schools don't allow you to randomly assign students to one program or another. So, in a causal research study, we would have comparison groups, and we would randomly assign children to the two groups. That usually can't happen in a school setting. There is a lot of correlational evidence. And one might argue, well, gee, if there's so much correlational evidence, doesn't that really hint at causation? One of the notions might be, if we have a good theoretical explanation for why there might be causation, then maybe the correlational evidence supplies some support for those theories. Another notion is maybe to use what we call mixed method designs. And that's where we use quantitative information, like scores on tests, as well as qualitative information, usually which might be in the form of interviews with maybe students and teachers and principals. So maybe we can, I'd like to think about this as kind of a lawyer arguing a case before a jury. How much evidence will it take to convince a reader that there is some effect of there is some effect of an arts partnership program and what that effect might be. So in designing or thinking about strategies for evaluating arts partnership, the first step, I would argue, would be to establish good communication with the administrators of the program, truly trying to understand what their goals are and trying to clarify what the program goals are. Often, evaluators are brought into a circumstance after the partnership is already exists and is already up and running. So, unfortunately, the planning and the designing which the evaluator might be able to contribute to, particularly in terms of producing an effective evaluation, usually has to happen after the fact than before the fact. So, what are the goals? What are the goals for the evaluation process? How can we operationalize these outcomes? For instance, if the goals are something like we expect to help students to improve in learning language arts or in learning mathematics. Well, what do we mean by improve? Do we expect to see that on test scores? Do we expect to have teachers tell us that the children appear to be getting better? How do we know this? How can we work with the administrators to determine what kinds of things they're hoping to find and whether or not it's reasonable to be able to assess them? Is there a relationship between actually what goes on in the program and other outcomes? We need to help. Typically the goals are more general, and so we need to specify them. What does higher order thinking mean, and how is that going to be evidenced? And what tests are we going to use if we're going to use test scores? One of the challenges is how do we link the particular activities that are sponsored, let's say, by an orchestra program, such as artists visiting classrooms, with mastery test scores, state standardized test scores. Are the activities designed to be aligned with the state standards, which is typically what the mastery test scores look at? Are there alternative explanations for what's observed? For instance, are there other resources in schools that have challenges? Often they focus many resources on improving test scores. They might have tutors brought in. They might have after-school programs. The curriculum is oriented towards improving test scores. So how can we isolate the arts program and say, oh, it's the cause of any change that we might be observe in test scores? Usually, the best way to do this is to provide multiple data sources, that is, both quantitative and qualitative. Chatterjee, a TC faculty member in organization and leadership, proposed in 2004 something called an extended term mixed method design. A long word for relatively kind of the notion that we're going to collect quantitative and qualitative data over a long period of time. So what she proposes is that the best way to really evaluate an arts, any kind of program, is to have it is to be systematic, to be tracking over a period of time, and to use both qualitative and quantitative strategies. The first step in evaluations often is to include outside objective experts. They should be seen as part of the program team but at the same time, they need to be, often it's into the program's advantage to view these people as more objective, meaning outside. So often when I'm asked to do something, I'm asked partially because I'm at Columbia University, partially because I'm not initially associated with the program, so consequently I can be viewed as an outside objective expert. At the same time, I need to be able to work closely with the program people to fully understand the program. The next step would be to help modify, clarify, and refine the program goals so the evaluation can meet the program administrator's needs. And typically the evaluation report must address multiple audiences. For instance, it's typically one group that's interested are the administrators. How can they refine the program to improve it? Another audience may be the funders. Are they getting bang for their bucks? Is it a good investment? Another program might be school administrators. Do principals want to know, well, what benefit does this program have for my school? Ideally, the curriculum development process and the evaluation process must be closely tied together so that the outside arts organization, as it develops programming, ideally it's closely tied with the notion of, well, how are these outcomes going to be evaluated? A proposal draft is often exchanged with the program administrators and the evaluators. It's a way of kind of beginning a dialogue and to kind of firm up the understanding of what the goals are. So having several iterations going back and forth is important. The challenges are often to help the program planners refine and target their goals. Sometimes when they seek funding, they use very broad language. We're going to really improve these schools. But then when it comes to assessment, we have to be relatively specific. Typically in an evaluation of a program, there are multiple sources of information. So some of the sources obviously would be students, both students' perspectives and student achievement. Music teachers would be a source of information. Classroom teachers might be a source of information. School administrators and leaders. The people from the outside organization providing the experiences for the children. These might be orchestra members or museum docents. Could be a variety of musicians or artists. The program administrators are also a source of information. What did they intend? What are their hopes? And sometimes even the funders. What are they looking for? What are their expectations? Understanding that is important for the evaluator. How does one gather information? With a variety of tools, some of which you've already learned about in this course. We might use attitude scales. We might use interviews, focus groups, observations. We might have students or teachers keep journals. We might use state-mandated test scores. We might use written documents that describe the program. And then we might, the evaluator might construct assessments also. Some of these previous areas would more likely be constructed by the evaluator than already exist. The next section of this PowerPoint focuses on a report of a project that I've worked on for about 5 years. The New Jersey Symphony Orchestra Early Strings Program. And this is a depiction, this is a photograph of children who participate in the program playing at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center in Newark. This project specifically focused on state-mandated achievement test. I think it's called the New Jersey Ask in math and language arts. So the program that the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra Partnership with the Newark Public Schools, is what we call a modified Suzuki program. New Jersey Symphony Orchestra members visit schools. There is a culminating performance of the students at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, and the students also attend New Jersey Symphony Orchestra performances. So there are multiple parts of this program. In terms of research approach, you might consider this, there's a formal label, an ex post facto design. What it is that one classroom in each of 5 different schools participates in the program. And there are 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders in the program, and this particular report reports 5 years worth of data. So what happens is, somewhat arbitrarily, the principal says, okay, 1 2nd grade classroom will participate. And we've talked to principals, and they say it's somewhat random choice. Those group of 2nd graders then continue to study violin in the 3rd and 4th grade. While the other 4, say in a typical school there are 5 2nd grade classes, the other 4 2nd grade classes do not participate in the program at all. So in a sense, we don't have random assignment, but we do have one somewhat randomly selected intact classroom that the children in that classroom alone participate. And we looked particularly at their scores on the New Jersey Assessment of Skills and Knowledge. Here are some children participating in their lessons. So maybe one indicator of motivation might be the facial expressions. They at least appear to be enjoying themselves. Here's some data. So if we look at this chart, we can see this is from 2002. And the bars, the 3 groups of bars, or the 2 groups of bars, represent math, if you look at the bottom, and language arts. And the 3 columns talk about the percent of students in each group that were judged to be proficient. So we can see in math that actually 95% of those participating in the early strings program, the NESP students, were judged to be proficient, while only 56% of their colleagues, the other students in the 3rd grade, the other students in the 3rd grade at their school, only 56% were judged to be proficient. And in Newark as a whole, only 32% of the 3rd graders are judged to be proficient, or were judged to be proficient in math. And then the other 3 clusters show you those same 3 groups' performance in language arts. So clearly, the early string children are performing at a higher level, at least at this grade level, in 2002. This is 2003, 4th grade, and probably the same kids, right? We had 3rd graders in 2002, same children, 4th graders. And here we have, I've added some data. This is the New Jersey average. So this includes school districts like Ridgewood, which are, wealthy suburban districts. So the state average is all the districts in the state. So you can see that actually the NESP students in language arts actually do as well as the state average, and in math they actually do better than the state average. Okay, we have 4th grade in 2004. Again, here we have the NESP students doing better in terms of more of them are proficient in these 2 areas than all the other groups. 3rd graders, a different class, obviously. 3rd graders in 2005. NESP competing very well with the state averages and much better than the school or Newark in general. 4th graders, 2005. Similar results, consistent, similar results. Now these are, not causal necessarily. We weren't able to design a study that really would show causation. But The preponderance of evidence we were gathering seems to suggest something must be going on. Third graders in 2006, fourth graders in 2006. You can see we've added science here. In 2006, New Jersey began to test for statewide for science, and the NESP students are not quite doing as well as the state, but the important comparison is with their colleagues at the same schools, and that's the school, or the kind of the purple color bar, which they consistently do better than. Now, we did collect qualitative data also. So we asked classroom teachers, what do you think, tell us about the NESP kids, the kids that are studying violin. And so these are the kinds of things we heard. It helped them focus. It helps them pay attention. It's enriching. It has a positive effect on their reading. Their vocabulary has increased. They concentrate better. They're more focused. They tend to comprise the top students in our school. They do get an extra lot of attention. The question is it really the music instruction, or is it maybe self-image? They get to walk around school with violins. They're thought to be different or special. They get to perform on stages. Do they just feel good about themselves, and they feel good about school, and is that what helps them generally do well? So how do we explain what's going on? Is it a transfer of specifics? Well, the NESP program is not directly correlated with other subjects. Is it more likely to be self-regulation? Are they more disciplined? The quotes from the teachers seem to suggest that. Do they have more focused perceptions? Are they able to make connections and construct, and are they using different ways to construct and organize meetings? That's a suggestion that we made in our 1999 publication. It's unclear at this point what's happening. It's clear what's happening. It's unclear at this point what the cause is. This is a final slide showing students leaving NJPAC after a performance.